Suzanne, thank you very much for that. There's been a lot of analysis about who's to blame and what the lessons are following the Labor victory in Victoria over the weekend on Saturday night, the state election there. The latest has come from the former federal treasurer and Liberal Party heavyweight in Victoria, Peter Costello. He has suggested, amongst other things, that the federal factors were at least partly to blame for the Liberal loss, but he also points out that the Liberal Party in Victoria, the Liberal government in Victoria, had many of its own issues to blame. Joining me now is a fellow Victorian and now the Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister, Josh Frydenberg. Welcome to you.
Nice to be with you, David.
Let me read you some of what Peter Costello wrote today. He said, "Some bright spark thought up the idea that instead of having Tony Abbott, they would have John Howard join the campaign. It didn't swing a vote. Instead, it invited everyone to wonder why they were trotting out past leaders, not current ones, and played into Labor's campaign." Is he right? Did the Liberals play into Labor's campaign about Tony Abbott's unpopularity?
Well, I'm not going to criticise Peter Costello. He was a great treasurer and is a great Victorian and certainly knows a lot about politics. But on this case, in terms of talking about John Howard, I think John Howard was an important part of the promotions in the last week.
Did he swing a vote?
Well, he went out to a number of seats, including Ringwood and Burwood, and there were two seats that we actually were worried about in the last week, and we ended up retaining those two seats. So I think you can't claim that he didn't swing a vote there. He may have actually been responsible for helping us hold on to those seats. But Peter Costello did make the right point, which was the coalition in Victoria were behind even when Julia Gillard was Prime Minister. And this is the point. Well before Tony Abbott came on the scene, well before we had our budget in May, we were behind. And that was a result of the transfer in leadership, the slow start under Ted Baillieu, and the fact that the Jeff Shaw shenanigans dominated the headlines.
Now, Peter Costello also writes in relation to the federal government that, quote, getting rid of the barnacles has been as choppy as the barnacles themselves. Does he have a point there? There is still confusion and certainly unpopularity around some of these so-called barnacles.
Well, the Prime Minister even said in his long press conference that we had a tough week last week, and that's what I think they're referring to about the Medicare co-payment. But we have to go about the process of reform. Some of them are very difficult, those reforms, because of the nature of the Senate as it stands. That's not an excuse, that's just the reality. But there are also some other issues where we can act unilaterally, like the Prime Minister did this week on the ADF entitlements, where he said we would move to have some of those entitlements restored after the Prime Minister had talked with a number of my colleagues, including Teresa Gambaro, Ewan Jones, Natasha Griggs, all who have got large ADF presences in their own electorates.
Let me ask you about the GP co-payment, which you mentioned there. As a member of the front bench, can you articulate why you're doing this, why you want to impose a $7 fee?
Well, two reasons. Firstly, it's about getting the sustainability of Medicare over the long term. So 10 years ago, David, Medicare cost the taxpayer $8 billion. Today it costs $19 billion. In a few years' time, it's going to cost $34 billion.
Let me pull you up on that, because 10 years ago, our GDP was around $600 billion. Today, it's around $1,600 billion. So it's nearly tripled in 10 years. Health spending has grown by a pretty similar amount, in fact, just a bit less than that.
But the analysis is, with an ageing population, you're going to see more of a demand on health services. And having some sort of price signal, which, may I say, they have in a whole range of other economies, including comparable economies like the United States and elsewhere, is seen as a good thing, because if something's for free, it's really not for free, because the taxpayer is paying for it. But if something's for free in terms of going out to see your GP constantly, then that can be abused.
But are you overstating this abuse factor, that people are frivolously going to the doctor? Because last financial year, just going to some actual figures, last financial year, Commonwealth health spending actually fell in real terms. Total health spending is actually growing at its slowest rate since records began 30 years ago.
Well, in terms of the Medicare expenditure, that is growing. I mean, just look at that. And this was an issue that was talked about in the Commission of Audit as well, may I say, specifically about the growth in the health spend. The other point I wanted to make was about the future fund when it comes to medical research. Australia has a real strength in this area, and obviously this money is not going to pay off debt. This money is going to a $20 billion future fund.
Isn't that part of the problem here in actually not using this money to pay off debt, when all the talk is about a budget crisis.
Well, I would have thought the Labor Party would still oppose it even if it was going to pay off debt, because their whole argument is that people can't afford to pay, even though international experience shows that these type of price signals are accepted. And
maybe if you use this money to pay off debt, you wouldn't have to break promises elsewhere. Like the ABC cut, the tax increase that you've imposed.
But that's not about, that's not about breaking promises per se. It's actually about finding savings across the board, because the extent of the debt problem is $667 billion of debt, not $20 billion worth of debt.
And that's my point. If you use the money from this proposed GP co-payment to pay off debt, you might not have to break promises.
No, but we have to find savings right across the board. But isn't it ironic, David?
Not if you use this money to pay off debt.
Yes, you would. You'd still have to do so. I mean, you
wouldn't have to break promises.
No, but we've had a budget deficit this year, or it's just finished, of $48 billion. Now, when Wayne Swan got up and announced it in 2013, it was $18 billion.
And then when the PIFO came out mid-campaign, it was $30 billion.
Correct. And now we're going to have...
transferred $10 billion to the RBA. That made it $40 billion.
And now we're going to see a MyEFO in just a few weeks' time, which is going to indicate that we're really struggling on the revenue side as a result of the fall in the iron ore prices. So we've got a real budgetary situation.
So can we afford a medical research fund?
Well, we think it plays to our strengths. It will be capped out at that $20 billion, after which it goes into consolidated revenue. But isn't it ironic?
Surely there's a point at which the deficit's so deep that you say, we just can't afford this medical fund, and we can't afford paid parental leave.
Well, we can afford a paid parental leave because we believe it's about boosting productivity, it's about boosting workforce participation, and that has positive spin-offs for the economy. When it comes to medical research, we believe that that really is important over the long term. That will decrease our spend. But I just want to make the very important point, David, that Labor supports a co-payment on the PBS, and when Bob Hawke was in government, they supported a co-payment on Medicare.
And he got rolled soon after that. But on the PPL
policy, he was the principal.
Okay, the paid parental leave, you say it's going to increase productivity. What does the Productivity Commission actually say about this?
Well, the Productivity Commission says it's part of a suite of measures. What they say is you've got to look at childcare, which is when we've got a Productivity Commission report into childcare, and Susan Lay's doing a great job in that area, and we'll have more to say. But it's part and parcel of a suite of measures, David. I'm a big supporter of the paid parental leave scheme, because if I look at where we are compared to a country like Canada, we're about 6 points below in terms of female workforce participation, particularly when it comes to full-time employment. And I think this will make a difference.
Now, the government today, the Prime Minister and the Treasurer have been spending a lot of time talking up the achievements this year, and there certainly have been a list: the stopping the boats, the carbon tax repeal, the free trade agreements as well. Mining tax is gone. Why then do you think the government's finishing the year so poorly in the polls?
Well, I think some of these reforms are hard, and in the budget, selling it is the job that we have ahead of us. And
is this where you expected to be, though, 8 months ago when the budget was delivered?
No, I don't think so. I think that's a fair point. We'd always hoped to be in front in the polls, and we're behind, but we're still 2 years out, and we're still sticking to our guns, and the principles are the same, which is we were elected to fix the budget, and Labor promised more than 600 times a surplus, and they never delivered a one. And what I think you'll see from us going into the new year is a new approach in two ways. Firstly, we will articulate our message and our narrative and put it in the context of what are key Liberal principles, which are power of the individual, free enterprise, entrepreneurship, and providing a safety net for people who can't help themselves. That's important. And the second thing you'll see us do is really ping the opposition for the failures in government, because I think in Victoria that's a lesson. They had just taken over from a very bad Labor government, but people's memories faded about Mikey, the desal plant, and the other failures.
So more negativity.
Yeah, well, more focus on the failures of Labor and the reasons why Labor got the lowest primary vote in 100 years.
Do you need some fresh faces to push that case at the senior level? And I note the Prime Minister again today wouldn't say that David Johnston will still be there as Defence Minister next year.
Look, we've got a great team. Everyone is working hard, doing a good job. Those decisions are one for the Prime Minister, not for for other members of his team to opine on. But I think we feel very comfortable where we are with our team, with our policies, and I think you'll see us re-energised for 2015.
Josh Frydenberg, thank you.
Great to be with you.
We're going to take a break, then look at some consumer confidence figures out today. Stay with us.